Hello, everyone. Welcome to our weekly chat about local history. I'm Robert Lowell Goller. Thanks, as always, for joining us for this discussion. Happy New Year. I'm coming on a little early because it's New Year's Eve, and so I'm not coming on at the regular time, but most of you don't watch live anyway, so that's okay. This week, I'd like to talk a little bit about New Year's and the year that we're leaving behind us, 2024. And this time of year, you always see the year in reviews. People start talking about the legacy of the year, what will be remembered about the year and you'll see those news reports do the even the Easter Advertiser did a recap of the year. They always do, and the top 10 stories you'll see. So I was chatting with some people and we were talking about what will be remembered about 2024. And as a historian, and some of the historians that I read on a national level, one of the things they do is try to, especially nowadays with the media the way it is, and we are bombarded with news and things going on, that living in the moment with all this news, it's hard to figure out what will last. What will people look back on and say that was important? And so a lot of historians, including one particular historian I listen to daily and read daily, Heather Cox Richardson, she tries to figure out, and a lot of historians do this, is to figure out in 50 years, in 100 years, what will people look back on and consider important? Something that's important today in the moment may not last the test of time. And so in 50 years, they might not look back on it the same way. So that's kind of what we try to do. And that's what I tried to do this week as I was thinking about, okay, what's going to be truly historic about 2024 here in our local town? And what will people in 50, 100 years be looking back on and consider important? And so there's a couple things, couple events that I think when people look back on 2024, that they'll consider important or will get looked back on. What will a historian in 50, 100 years look back in 2024 looking for specifically, perhaps in a newspaper archive or something like that? And of course, the April 8th eclipse is one of those very important things that I think people are going to look back on and remember 2024 in our local area at least. It was the first time since 1925 that we were in the path of totality of a full solar eclipse, and we had been talking about it for months, and the eclipse glasses and all those things. And as part of my research and a lot of historians' research looking back on eclipses, to put this eclipse, the 2024 eclipse, in perspective, is to look back on previous ones. And I was looking back at one in 1925, January 1925, which was the last time we were in the path of totality. There were ones before that, but we didn't have a whole lot of folks living here or a record of it. Actually, um, uh, there was one in 1804, I think, before that. Don't quote me on that, but there wasn't a newspaper reporting on it, that sort of thing. So the 1925 one, which is actually we're coming up on the 100th anniversary of that eclipse, we looked back on it, and actually the 2024 eclipse, although it was cloudy and we thought that it was going to pass us by and we wouldn't be able to see it because of the cloud cover, the clouds just opened up just in time for us to see that eclipse. And actually in 1925, because of the news reports and the diaries that we have, we know that it was full cloud cover and they didn't really get to see it. It got dark, but they didn't get to see the eclipse. So we probably had an opportunity once in 200, maybe 300 years to see that eclipse, see this actual sun and the moon do its thing for the eclipse on April 8th. And that's why it was so important. I was at a historians conference and we were talking about how we recorded the eclipse, how we asked people in our communities to record it either in diaries, take photos, the swag that we got, t-shirts with the clips on it, bags. We saved those things because it was, again, it's rare for it to happen. And also, a lot of us it brought the community together in a weird way. And it also connected us to the past and to the future because there are few chances for us to see that, to experience a full total solar eclipse. And so it brought us together in that way. And so as historians, we're trying to, it's sort of a time marker, and we can look back at what people were doing the previous eclipse. And because it's so rare, It's definitely historic. The reason I say that we'll remember 2024, future generations will remember 2024 for the eclipse was I know how much I looked back to 1925 on the reports of the eclipse back then, how people reacted to it. We reacted in a very similar way. The technology's changed, our worlds have changed. We now have the internet. We have all these things that back in 1925 they didn't have. But our reaction to that celestial event did not change. So it's interesting as a historian to look back on the exact same event, total solar eclipse, but how things are different and how things are the same. So it's sort of a time marker that as historians we can kind of use this very same event, but how we treated it differently or how we reacted to it the same way. So what I think is going to happen in 2044, 2144, it'll be October 26, 2144. People are going to look back on 2024 to see how we reacted to the eclipse because they'll be experiencing the same event that we did, and of course that none of us will be around for that, but it's connecting us to people in 2144. So I know how much we looked back to previous solar eclipses, so it's natural that in 2144 they're going to be looking back at 2024 to see what was happening here in East Aurora. So I would say that's what one big event that's going to be remembered and stand the test of time when people look back on 2024. And again, there are little events that happen throughout the year, but I think these are events that people are going to look back in the newspaper archives from today, and our diaries. And that's why we were pushing so much at the time to write a diary, keep a diary every day, um, or as much as you can, because future generations are going to look back and try to see how we were living. And so I think that certainly the eclipse is one of the things that is going to be remembered. The second thing I think, and a lot of us kind of forgot about it, we don't talk about it much anymore, is the tornado um, that touched down in West Falls or just outside of West Falls um, in July. And uh, the reason it's historic and the reason I think it's going to be something that's talked about or looked back upon quite a bit in future generations is it's the first time since they started recording tornadoes in 1950, and of course that they have and I wrote about this over the summer, talked about it in a live stream, but it's the first. They have very specific requirements for what a tornado is, and so this was the first one in the town of Aurora since they started documenting actual tornadoes in 1950. First time one's touched down in the town of Aurora. There have been ones around in surrounding towns that were confirmed, and I went back and did some research into the old newspaper archives for what they called cyclones or tornadoes going back to the beginning of our newspaper records. And there were probably others, including one in the village. But the one on July 10th of 2024 was the first one that was uh, verified using the modern technology since 1950. So that's a really big deal. And I think people are going to look back on 2024 again if we ever have another tornado touchdown. Hope not, but certainly there's the potential. They actually were saying that there were more tornadoes up north in the Northeast this past year than in a very long time. There was a news report about it the other day. So we may see them again, and we're going to look back on 2024 and the events around 2024 and the town of Aurora tornado, I think, in a historical perspective. So I think that's another event that's going to rise to the top um, in the town of Aurora's history is when we look back on 2024. Now, there have been tornadoes in surrounding towns since 1950, but that was the truly historic tornado, and a lot of people couldn't believe that we hadn't had one ever, and verified anyway, but at least not since 1950. So that was quite a historic event. So I think 2024 will be remembered for that as well, in addition to the eclipse. And the third thing I was thinking that will come out as I was discussing the hamlet of West Falls, and those who may not be from the town of Aurora, Village of East Aurora, I know I get a lot of people listening. It's on the southwestern corner of our town, the hamlet of West Falls, And I think what's going to, when people look back at 2024, there are certain events that happen in a community throughout history, and you can tell kind of things shift a bit. For instance, a lot to do with transportation. I've written about when we became Route 20 and Route 20A, our main street through East Aurora, the United States highway routes, um, and the railroad coming through, things like that. The railroad coming to a community isn't just about the railroad. It brings economic prosperity, it brings crime, it brings other things with it. Um, and I think this year, with the road reconstruction in the hamlet of West Falls, and then they've gotten funding, the New York Forward grant funding, there's a lot happening in 2024 in the hamlet of West Falls. And I think this, when people look back on the history of the town of Aurora as well as the hamlet of West Falls, um, the road reconstruction, which was a pretty big deal, and as well as the funding and the revitalization that is coming to the hamlet, which has its roots in the year 2024. I think when people look back, they're going to sort of mark 2024 as a turning point year for West Falls. That's just my prediction. And so that's another thing. It's not a specific event. It's not like the tornado or the eclipse, but it's something that I think is going to be looked back on and be like, that's a moment that a direction changed, or a big thing happened for the hamlet of West Falls. And if you don't live in the East Aurora, or this is the case in any community, you can look back a lot of times. Anything involving transportation, road construction projects, those tend to be a railroad coming. We are so associated, our hamlets and our little communities are associated with our roads, our highways, that when Route 400 came through, that changed East Aurora, and that was a sort of a turning point. We became more quote unquote suburbia. And the plaza came with it. There are certain events, and I think with West Falls, that 2024 is going to be a marker year when we look back historically. So those are the three things that I think when people look back to 2024 that are going to think about: the eclipse, the tornado, which it'd be easy to forget about if you didn't actually have it impact you. Of course, if it impacted you, you're not going to forget it. But that is so rare. I think people are going to look back on that, as well as the revitalization of West Falls and the road construction there. Um, and there might be others, but I think those are the ones that are going to rise to the top. With that said, this is a good opportunity on as we switch years to. Uh, I'm going to beat my drum again and be the broken record about documenting your own personal history. We often talk about events, big events that change history, but it's the evolution of things. It's not always one big thing that changes. It's how we evolve each day, and a lot of times we can't tell that without a day-to-day diary of somebody. Um, and the little things that happen in a community. They put in again the trees in our village, and the wires, the utility poles going up today. Well, that was a big deal back more than 100 years ago. And each street was getting utility poles, and then the streets were being paved little by little. It wasn't all at once. So we use the newspapers, yes, but someone keeping a diary of all the things that are happening around and about them in their lives is very important to the preservation of history. So I would hope that maybe some of us would take a New Year's resolution of documenting our history a little bit more, and keeping a diary. It's a very good way. People ask me all the time, how can I help document local history? Keeping a diary is the best way. A journal. You don't have to put, all sorts of personal stuff in it, but that's the one thing you can do in 2025 and beyond to document local history. If you're looking for some way to help, that's probably the most important thing to do. Another prediction I have as we move forward is, I think a lot, as we talked about national politics, certainly 2024 was a huge year for national politics, and the presidential election and all these things. But I think a lot of things are uh, importance of local communities. We're seeing that. I'm seeing that anecdotally. You see TV shows and sitcoms about local communities and not national things. It's local communities, and that's why I think talking about local history and how it impacts national, it relates to national history. All, like I said, all politics is local, but also all history is local. Things, grassroots movements, and I think we're going to see a lot more of that even with the internet. We're seeing more. This is just anecdotal from what I'm seeing, is more focus on small communities and like West Falls, the town of Aurora, village of East Aurora, and a focus on that and on community events and things like that. That's just a prediction. I see a shift from more global and our outlook to things to focusing on our local neighborhoods and communities. At least I hope, but I see that. I'm just sensing that. And that's just an anecdotal prediction from me. As we look back on, as I do research looking in newspapers and things, I can see that shift. It's a sort of a pendulum that goes back and forth, and I see a shifting toward a more local focus, and focusing on our local communities using the technology that we have, social media and things like that. But I just sense that, and reading the paper and sensing a time that's sort of, you see over time that history does repeat, and I feel like we're shifting back into that. That's just my thought. And so that's why I like to focus on local history and how it relates to national history, because again, um, a lot of things that happen at the local level are associated with national history as well. We're not immune, and we're not, and we say we're East Auroras in a bubble, but we're not. What happens outside of our communities is it does impact us, and we see that throughout history. So keep a diary. And if you have ideas about what 2024 will be, if I missed something, please let me know. But those are just my thoughts. We were chatting, friends and I were chatting the other day about what we'll remember about 2024, and I thought it'd be a cool topic to talk about from a history's perspective. So again, thank you for joining me. Thank you for joining me for these weekly chats throughout 2024. We'll be back in 2025. Again, I'm Robert Lowell Goller. I am the town and village historian, but these videos and my research, the books I'm going to be hopefully coming out with in 2025, those are all not associated officially with my job as town and village historian. Again, thanks for joining me. Put your comments in the comment section or send me a private message. And until next week, Happy New Year, stay safe, and we'll see you next time.